Hello, welcome back, and happy 2026. One of the first videos I did on this channel was kind of a guide slash overview of how multitasking worked on iPadOS, because I saw a lot of people still struggling to understand those concepts. Now things have of course changed a lot in the past year with iPadOS 26, but I'm still seeing people struggling to understand exactly how windowing and multitasking works on their tablet. So I figured let's start the year off with an updated look on what multitasking looks like on iPadOS, especially with the changes that have come in 26.1 and 26.2, to see if we can't make sense of all this. So let's go ahead and get started. This guide is going to assume that you have an iPad, obviously, and you've already upgraded to iPadOS 26. If you're not sure if your iPad supports iPadOS 26, I'll put a list of compatible devices on the screen, but you can also go to slatepad.org and read the written version of this, which will contain a little more detail and a nice written guide for you to refer back to if you need it. So let's start by going into Settings, and then we'll go into Multitasking and Gestures. We'll be in this menu a lot in this video, and we'll start with the different multitasking modes. So in prior versions of iPadOS, Apple restricted floating windows to higher-end iPads with Apple's M series chips, so that's the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. If you had an iPad mini or the standard iPad, you were left with the multitasking experience we've been used to this point, which has mostly been split view and slide over. But now with iPadOS 26, every iPad that runs this update has access to the same multitasking features. There's 3 different modes to consider. Let's start with the first one, which is full screen apps. So I like to think of full screen apps as kind of a classic iPad mode or maybe even a super focused mode, but it's the mode that is closest to the iPad experience we've had to date. So if I open Safari, Safari opens, full screen, I can do whatever I need to, swipe home, and then back to the home screen. Very simple, very easy. Now the difference between this mode and the way things used to work before iPadOS 26 is that in full screen app mode, you no longer have access to split view and slide over. This is really all it is. Now, some people will tell you this is a bad thing, this is crippled, this is baby mode, all sorts of obnoxious things, but I don't really see it this way. One of the unique characteristics of the iPad is that even in spite of everything we're going to talk about, an iPad at its core is really a one app at a time experience. Now, it's been treated as a bad thing pretty much since the iPads existed, but I don't know about you. I find myself constantly being inundated by notifications and distractions and trying to do 20 things at once, like on a laptop. And we're seeing people start to push back on that, and people are yearning for a quieter and more focused experience. I don't know if you see as many people as I do on social media wishing Apple would bring back the iPod, but the iPad being one app at a time, I'd argue is actually a good thing for some people because it helps you focus. You also have to consider the user who buys their iPad not really as a full computer, but as a single-purpose computer. So if you were an artist and the only role the iPad serves for you is drawing or using Procreate, or say you use sheet music on your iPad, or maybe you just use your iPad for gaming, there's a good chance you don't care at all about any of this multitasking stuff. And full screen apps is a great mode for those people as well. I'll get off my soapbox, but I really do believe that for a lot of iPad users, this is the mode they should stick with. Now, the interesting thing about full screen apps is there are a few features that are now only accessible in this mode. So I'm going to go into Safari, and you'll see that along the bottom we have what's called the shelf. And a shelf is this kind of carousel that shows you all the open windows you have for that app. So I have about 6 different Safari windows open here that I've accumulated over time that I can switch between here. And I can even open a new one by tapping the new window button. Do what I need to. Let's open Google, for example. I can bring the shelf back up by tapping the app icon, but by default it'll show up when you open the app. Go back to my previous window. If I'm done with this one I just opened, swipe it away. The shelf was one of Apple's previous answers into how do you manage the different windows an app can open, and now that's only available in full screen apps mode. There's another feature that you can only access in this mode as well, and that's corner shortcuts. If I swipe in from the lower right corner, it brings up this floating window, and this is the Quick Note window. So Quick Note is a feature that gives you a floating, kind of persistent notes window for you to quickly jot something down, and then when you're done, you can slide it off the screen or dismiss it entirely, and then you can always pull it back up from that right corner. It floats over anything else that's on the screen, and is potentially really handy if you just want to capture something before you forget it. On the other corner, bottom left, you can easily take a screenshot. Drag in, that brings you to the screenshot UI. You can, of course, mark it up, whatever you want to do with this, and then you're done. So those corner shortcuts are only accessible in full screen app mode. If you want to configure them, let's go back into settings, multitasking gestures. You'll see there's this option that says swipe finger from corner. You can disable it entirely if you want, but if you tap on these, you're able to essentially switch which side does what. Now, it would be great if there were more options here, but it's been like 5 years and Apple hasn't added anything to this, so I'm assuming they're probably never going to, which is unfortunate, but you have these features here if you choose to use them in full screen app mode. So now let's move to the second multitasking mode, which is windowed apps. This is the windowing experience that is the most like your traditional laptop OS like Mac OS or Windows. So getting started is pretty simple. I open Safari, and by default it's going to open in full screen. And I want to stop here a minute because I've seen some complaints that windowed apps mode makes the iPad experience messy and unfocused and is kind of against the simplicity the iPad's supposed to have. But you had to remember that even in windowed apps mode, windowing is pretty much entirely optional. You don't have to resize windows if you don't want to. So why would you even bother with this mode if that were the case? Well, there's two reasons. One is the iPhone app experience. It turns out when you open an iPhone-only app, like I'll open Threads here, iPhone apps now open in a free-floating iPhone-sized window. You can kind of resize it a little bit, but it's not really going to budge from that iPad aspect ratio. But now, this experience isn't terrible like the old iPad compatibility mode used to be. So for me, on my 11-inch iPad Pro, which is replacing my iPhone as my daily driver, I keep all my iPad apps full screen, and then I've loaded up some iPhone-only apps on there that I can use without having to go get my phone. So if I want to, warm my coffee with the Ember app, or browse Threads, which I really shouldn't be, or, I don't know, order food with DoorDash or something, I can do those things from my iPad without having to get up, without having to go find my phone, without having to break my focus from my iPad, because the experience is so much better. This is also one of the only ways you can access split view and slide over, which we'll get to in a minute. So I'm in Safari, full screen. In the bottom right corner, you'll see a drag handle. Drag it in, and the app moves into a window. If you use the previous version of Stage Manager that had floating windows, you'll note that the resizing experience is much smoother. That's because, and Apple mentioned this a few times during WWDC, Windows have been entirely re-architected in iPadOS 26, so this experience is smoother. You don't see the window kind of lurching between a few different sizes. It's as smooth as you'd expect. In the upper left corner, you'll see we have these three kind of traffic light buttons, and these are the window controls for Mac OS. This replaces the multitasking menu we used to have at the top of every window in iPadOS 18. If I tap on the traffic light buttons, they expand so I can actually grab them, and you see red, yellow, green, they work kind of like you'd expect. The green button is going to maximize a window, or if it's already maximized, brings it back to its windowed form. The yellow button is going to minimize or hide the app. Then I bring it back, it's right where I left it. And the red button is going to close the app, like swiping it away in the app switcher, so that when I close it and open Safari, it actually pulled up an old Safari window I had. That one is now gone. A nice little tip for window management is you can actually double tap the top of a window and also toggle between full screen and windowed mode. Another nice thing you can do with the window controls is window tiling. So if I tap and hold those buttons, I get a menu that pops up that gives me some positioning options for my windows. I can easily bring the app back to full screen, but say I wanted to have a split view with two apps side by side. I can do that from here as well. So I'm going to tap and hold those buttons. You'll see one of my options is kind of this left half. So Let's open another iPad app because iPhone apps cannot participate in window tiling. So I'll open Calendar. It opens. I'm going to tap and hold. Tap on the right side, and now I have a vertical split, just like the split view we had in iPadOS 18. You can even get a little crazier with these, right? So if I tap and hold, I can divide the screen into thirds if I had 3 apps open, and I can even divide the screen into quarters if I want to have 4 apps in the 4 corners, which personally to me looks kind of ugly, but I know some people love tiling their windows this way. I actually want to note something here for you. So you see I have my apps in 4 corners here. When I rotate my iPad, you'll notice now they've turned into a vertical split view. Now I set that up before I started recording, but you would think that if I set my windows in 4 corners, it would do the same thing when I rotate the iPad. But iPadOS remembers your window positioning per orientation. That means you can have a different layout for your windows depending on how you rotate your iPad. So again, it's nice I can have my windows in this vertical split view, portrait, and I turn it back around, it's 4 corners, or maybe it's in thirds, or however I want to arrange these. iPadOS will remember that for you, which is actually pretty powerful. Next, let's talk about split view and slide over. So originally these features either weren't in iPadOS 26 or they were harder to access, but Apple has been seemingly responding to community feedback and making adjustments in point updates, so now this experience is a little bit better. Starting with split view, if you're not familiar, split view is a feature that lets you divide your screen in half and have one app on one side, one app on the other. There's really like 5 different ways you can get into split view now. First one, and this is probably the longest way, is to use those traffic light buttons. So if I tap and hold, again, I can put this one on the left side, come over here, and put this app on the right side, and now I have my split view, just like I used to have. Grabbers here, so I can actually resize this, and you have more freedom than you used to have with the old split view in terms of the dimensions between these 2 apps. But like I said, that probably was the longest way of doing it, and we can do better. I can also use a flick gesture to move these apps into split view as well. I'm going to grab Safari, kind of fling it to the left, divides itself in half, same with Calendar, and boom, I have a split view that way as well. Now in 26.2, one of the features Apple re-added was the ability to use drag and drop, kind of like we used to do, where we'd have an app in full screen, like I have Safari in full screen here. I'm going to grab Calendar, drag it to the side, and it opens in a split view, just like we used to have. You can also do something similar if you have a keyboard. I'm going to put Safari back in full screen, got my Magic Keyboard attached. I'm going to pull up Calendar, and from Spotlight, I can actually drag that out, again, into a split view. The other way we can do this is with the Shortcuts app. Now, I'll go ahead and launch that. And it turns out there's been an action in iPadOS for a number of years now to let you open 2 apps in a split view. So if I were to, I'll do a new shortcut here. I'll search the actions and say, I'll just type split. And you see one of the options here is split screen apps. I'll tap that and I'll select 2 apps I'm working with. So we'll do Safari and we'll do Calendar. We'll name this something like Calfari, because that makes sense. And I have my shortcut. When I tap it, those apps launch in split screen. You can even go a step further if you want and give yourself a home screen icon to trigger this with one tap. So if you go back into the shortcut, bring down the menu, you'll see there's an add to home screen option, which I'm going to tap here, and then you're able to actually assign a custom image to its app icon. And I'm going to go crazy here and actually use Image Playground for something and see what we can do here. So I'm going to say tablet split screen apps. I don't think I can say split view here because Image Playground doesn't like copyrighted terms. Thank you, Apple. And then we'll say web browser It's also kind of slow. And calendar app. For demonstration purposes, we're just going to take this one. I'm going to save this image to my photo library. We'll come back to shortcuts. Now I can say choose photo. The photo picker will eventually show up here. I'll use that as my app icon. And now, if I go back to the home screen, I have my custom app icon for my shortcut. I'll tap it, and I have my split view apps. So that's really handy. If you have two apps you often use in split view side by side, you can give yourself one tap access to that. Now slide over. The story is kind of the same here. Wasn't here initially, now is here. But this version of slide over isn't exactly like the one we had before. We gained some features and we lost some features. Let's see. So I'll have Safari and Calendar here. Let's move Calendar over here. The first way to get an app into slide over is by tapping and holding the traffic light buttons. And then at the bottom it says enter slide over. Boom. The app is in slide over. You'll notice, because of the liquid glass design, the slide over window exists in this kind of floating glass platter, which I actually like. I think a lot of people don't like it, but I think it looks kind of cool. And just like before, I'll slide it off the screen. The interesting thing is that you couldn't do before with the previous slide over is I can just open my slide over app if I want. If you remember before, you had to have another app open to be able to pull over the slide over window, but now I can access the slide over app directly from the home screen. And if you use an external display, you have access to your slide over app there for the first time as well. Now you'll notice I said slide over app, not slide over apps. Before, you used to be able to stack a number of apps in what was called the slide over stack and rapidly switch between them. In iPadOS 26, you can only have a single app in slide over at any given time. Right now it's Calendar, but if I were to open Safari and put it in slide over, it kicks Calendar out, and now it's in slide over. So that when I reopen Calendar, it's in a window and Safari is not. That is a bummer to a lot of people. I think me included, because I actually use the slide over stack a fair amount, but you win some, you lose some, I guess. Another way you can get an app into slide over is through the dock with drag and drop, just like we had before. Grab Calendar, move it to the side, and it's in slide over. Same story with the keyboard. Have a keyboard attached. We'll bring up, let's say, podcast this time. I'll drag from Spotlight to the side, and now it is in slide over. So even though we lost the slide over stack, we did still gain a couple things with the new slide over. So if I pull podcast up that's in the slide over window, you'll notice a couple things. The slide over window is now resizable. So before it was a fixed size, but now you can actually resize it. It can be taller, shorter, wider, however you want to do it. The slide over window is now flexible. The interesting side effect of that is that now any app can go into slide over, even apps that don't resize. I like to use Final Cut Pro for this demonstration because it's an app that should resize but for some reason doesn't. If I tap and hold those traffic light buttons, again I can say enter slide over, and you'll see this full screen app is now in the slide over window. I can swipe it away, swipe it in, it floats over my current window. It's an interesting side effect with the new slide over. So this is a good point to talk about keyboard shortcuts. So in the old days, if you had a hardware keyboard connected, and only if you had a hardware keyboard connected, you could hold Command in an app and see the keyboard shortcuts that it offered, which was fine for apps that only offered a small handful of shortcuts. But for an app like Safari that has dozens of shortcuts, it wasn't the most efficient way of servicing that information. So if you're using Windowed Apps Mode or Stage Manager, you can swipe down from the top and access the menu bar. And you can access this whether or not you have a keyboard attached, which is good. And it behaves much like the menu bar on macOS. You can tap on it, see the various options you have and their keyboard shortcuts, and easily access them. Now, not a ton of iPad apps support custom keyboard shortcuts, but there are a few common ones that every app gets access to. If you go to the window menu, kind of that top section here, You minimize, your full screen, center controls. You even have access to keyboard shortcuts for window tiling if you want to put an app on half the screen. It's even a great way if you're using an external display, you can move your app from your iPad to your monitor if you need to. The third and final multitasking mode in iPadOS 26 is Stage Manager. So I kind of refer to this as Stage Manager 2.0. We've had a version of this since iPadOS 16 for some iPads, and it had its quirks, it had its bugs, and there were things that Apple never really addressed with it that were frustrating to the community. But this is a new version that's built on top of everything we just talked about in Windowed Apps mode. So Stage Manager at its core is really just a way to group apps into different workspaces. So I have settings open here, right? If I open Safari, it opens, I'll window it so you can see, but it opened in its own workspace by itself. If I were to open Podcasts, okay, that opened in its own workspace as well. You get the idea. On the left side here, you can access your recent apps and stages that you've opened, so you can quickly switch between them. Now, Stage Manager is great for grouping apps by task. So say, for example, you were writing a paper for school. I might have Apple Books open. I might pull in the Notes app into a space. Maybe there's a presentation part of this. We'll pull in Keynote. And now these three apps live in this stage. And I can swipe in from the left to pull up the switcher to get back to the different stages I have open, like my Safari stage, or I come back to this one. So this is a great way of grouping apps by task if that's the thing you need to do. A nice shortcut if you need to switch between different stages is swiping along the bottom of the screen as well. You can do that and go cycle between your open stages, and that's pretty great. One other thing I'll note about Stage Manager is for slide over, you might think that you'd be able to have a different slide over window per stage, but that is unfortunately not the case. There is, again, one app in slide over, and it's persistent across all the stages you have open. So it's easy to look at these three different multitasking modes and say, wow, the iPad's really complicated now. But it's only as complicated as you make it. It can be really simple for those users who want that focus or need that simplicity, but it's also really flexible. Apple calls the iPad its most flexible device, and I think that shows itself both in hardware, when you attach a keyboard or a stylus, but that's now also manifesting in software. I have these three different multitasking modes, and I can switch between them as I need to. For example, I could maybe go into full screen apps when I'm just reading or just web browsing. And then maybe I want to work on a project, I switch to Stage Manager. There's even a handy control center switch you can enable. If I tap and hold here, you can see, to quickly switch between Stage Manager and windowed apps as I need to. The software is getting more flexible and adaptable to adapt itself to the way you may want to work, which I think is great. The goal of a video like this is really just to show you your options. When you know what your options are, you can find workflows that work for you and the way that you want to work with your iPad. That's going to do it for this one. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you. I appreciate you and your time. If you could like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out, that would help me and the channel out just a ton. Make sure you go to slatepad.org for iPad news, reviews, written versions of videos, links to my social media, all of that good stuff. And with that, I will catch you all in the next one. Happy 2026, and take care.